Okay, so hello everybody. It's great to be here this evening to celebrate the AGM for the Hackney Society, and I'll be speaking to you from pew 19 in the Unitarian Meeting House where Mary Wollstonecraft sat. Now Mary lived and worked on the Green, which is very close to where I live and work, and in the late 90s, when my children were at Newington Green Primary, I was given a copy of Pat Haynes' book about Newington Green and the history, and in it there's a couple of pages about Mary Wollstonecraft and her life and times on the Green, setting up a school for girls, meeting Richard Price as Reverend of the Meeting House, and being embraced really by the dissenting community here, which shaped her views, her point of view, and also gave her a way of earning money as a writer, as an independent woman at that time, and in later life, of a very short life, to write A Vindication of the Rights of Women. So, looking at Mary, this dewy screen print of Mary Wollstonecraft, we can only celebrate being in the Unitarian Meeting House today and for the occasion of the Hackney Society AGM. There isn't a better place for us to start than pew 19, where Mary Wollstonecraft sat when she lived and worked on Newington Green, a place that she found nourishing and enlarged her vision of how she felt emancipation would benefit both men and women. This pew is the starting point of my artistic work with Fragments Monuments Performance and Film Company, where we did extensive performance work using both the Unitarian Meeting House and the Green. And I've just shared with you the memorable moments of the box dress, really a critical costume to start discussing the emancipation of women and referencing Wollstonecraft's own writing about confined in cages like the feathered race. So today I've planned a couple of different offerings really, and the first one is a biography that's quite fragmented of Wollstonecraft's life, and this was written in terms of script development really by an actor when we did Di's Midsummer Night Party for Stoke Newington Summer Festival, of course, which is well documented in the Anthology by the Hackney Society of 50 years of the Hackney Society, and Maureen Diffley wrote that interesting piece. The second part of my talk today is more constructed and focuses on the contribution that Wollstonecraft's writing has made to citizenship, and one can only say that the associations and alliances that she made on Newington Green were a very distinct part of that. And as I'm standing here, we've got Richard Price plaque, as you can see, which is one of the original plaques to Richard Price, the Reverend at Newington Green, and great friend of Mary Wollstonecraft. And then on the other side is Anna Birch. So we're embraced here by also the new Wollstonecraft plaque, which was designed and commissioned by a member of the Meeting House congregation. So to kick off, we're just going to talk about Mary Wollstonecraft and who she was. Who was she? 18th century feminist writer and mother of Mary Shelley, author of Frankenstein, her daughter. Wollstonecraft was born in Spitalfields, London, but her father turned to drink, so she had an abusive family. and the family fortunes were scraped together. They had farms in Essex and in Yorkshire, but they all failed. Wollstonecraft found herself protecting her mother from her father's violence. She had a very great friend, Frances Blood, and she ran a school for girls on Newington Green with Frances, who was also called Fanny Blood. And here she was welcomed by Dr. Price into the local circle of dissenters. The school folded when Fanny got married. After a spell as a governess in Ireland, Wollstonecraft was befriended by Joseph Johnson, who set her up with lodgings. She wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Women in 1792. This fiercely polemic, feminist and fiery tome, it rails against the bitter bread of dependence, which kept women either domestic slaves, her words, or alluring mistresses. In a time when she was denied civil, political and sexual rights. Wollstonecraft demanded justice for one half of the human race. Her demands that women be restored to their lost dignity and labour prompted Walpole to call her a hyena in petticoats. She went to France in 1792 and documented the turmoil of the French Revolution. Whilst there, she met Gilbert Imlay, a businessman, American businessman. He was running goods for the Jacobin regime. Their relationship resulted in the birth of Fanny Imlay, and Wollstonecraft's association with Imlay may have been useful to the Jacobins, who may have helped her to avoid prison at that time, which was the fate of many of her friends who supported Mirabeau and the Girondins. When she returned to England in 1794, she wrote one of her first travel books, An Historical and Moral View of the French Revolution, which was one of the sources for Thomas Carlyle's book, The French Revolution, A History in 1837. Her failure to persuade Imlay to care for her and her child led her to attempt suicide twice and to take laudanum. She was rescued after jumping off Putney Bridge into the Thames. Later, she married William Godwin, but she died giving birth to their daughter, Mary Shelley. Godwin wrote a posthumous memoir of his beloved wife, memoirs of the author of A Vindication of the Rights of Women, which he published 4 months after her death in 1798. This ruined her reputation in Georgian England, and her writings were almost forgotten. She was reclaimed as an inspiration by later women writers, such as suffragist Millicent Fawcett, Virginia Woolf, and academic Janet Todd. Now, Todd found fragments of Wollstonecraft's writing when she was studying for her PhD in the States. Sylvia Pankhurst, who you'll be familiar with, suffrage campaigner and East London activist, notes that as one of the first women to argue for active citizenship, Wollstonecraft wrought the woman's claim to emancipation, first advanced by Mary Astle in 1697, a long time ago. The claim gained a remarkable impetus when John Stuart Mill initiated the first debate in the House of Commons on women's suffrage on 20th of May 1867, and of course Mill lived on Newington Green. Wollstonecraft said, "I may excite laughter by dropping a hint, which I mean to pursue at some future time. For I really think that women ought to have representatives instead of being arbitrarily governed without having any direct share allowed them in the deliberations of government." Mary Beard, Cambridge Professor of Classics, says, "Every woman who wants to make an impact on the way this country is run, from the House of Commons to the pub quiz, has Mary Wollstonecraft to thank." Beard supported our campaign to build a memorial to Mary Wollstonecraft because she believes Wollstonecraft had such impact on so many areas of our lives today. Associations on Newington Green. Wollstonecraft met her mentor, Richard Price, on the Green, and as a Republican and cleric, he offered his encouragement as Wollstonecraft focused on her writing, and he introduced her to the radical publisher Joseph Johnson. Newington Green offered Wollstonecraft the support she needed to become a successful writer and to fund both her life as an independent woman and to support her extended and dependent family. The new track beaten out by Wollstonecraft resulted in her most famous book, A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. Written during the early revolutionary burst of activity in France, this determining publication moved Wollstonecraft into the world of political discourse. She attacked education and wanted to rid society of monarchy, church, and the military. Johnson published the book in 1792, the same year as the Tuileries were stormed in Paris, and Tom Paine, who she met at Newington Green, published his Rights of Man, Part 2. Over 220 years later, her treatise was included in the dozen British books that changed the world, and the most widely read political book by a woman ever. Unfortunately, Mary Wollstonecraft's legacy was erased in the posthumous memoir written by her husband, William Godwin. As the first woman travel writer, she'd lived in Paris during the Reign of Terror, 1793, and she'd left Paris for safety and had her first child out of wedlock in 1794. She was a single parent. She broke the mould for women in the 18th century and was castigated by even liberal sections of society. The exciting and passionate life led by Wollstonecraft was her downfall. Janet Todd wrote about the role of Wollstonecraft and how her life played in her memorialization. Early on, it was realized that Wollstonecraft's life itself needed to be vindicated. So having been erased and trashed by the writing of her husband, she was invisible, and her own life had to be vindicated in itself. And Todd makes the point that for 200 years, the life of Wollstonecraft is about pro-feminist opinions and thoughts and anti-feminist opinions and thoughts. She was trolled, she was abused in writing, she received the most appalling kind of erasure. So in its way, that shows us anti-feminist thought as much as her contribution shows us pro-feminist thought. Wollstonecraft travelled widely, visiting Lisbon and Norway and Sweden on business. These experiences, plus her role as a governess, led her to have an outward-looking approach and deep understanding of class oppression and the role of the Jacobin and what the Jacobin citizen might be. Barbara Taylor argues that the good citizen of British Jacobinism was inveterately social, bound to his or her fellows by common interests and social affections. Taylor's characterization suggests a context for Wollstonecraft's understanding of the importance of dependency, as well as independence, and her view of marriage as a fellowship of mutually equal, reliant people. Her understanding, Wollstonecraft's understanding of partnership and dependence is central to her role as a trailblazer for women as citizens with a right to vote and to be members of Parliament. While she emphasised women's responsibility to educate the children of the future, the next generation, Wollstonecraft undoubtedly imagined independent women as fully participating citizens. Because of her travels, she had a global view of the world and argued as individual responsibility and an enlightened view of civic life. As a citizen of the world, she understood the complex links that join people, the importance of a proactive approach to life and fragility of human existence. Underpinning this is her pleasure and skill in high-quality philosophical thought, and developing this, her belief that all people must be educated as responsible citizens. Her insistence on usefulness and dissent and debate and the importance of human rights couldn't be more relevant today. So onward we go, recovering this legacy. To connect with her radical voice and calls for women to have power over themselves, Fragments Monuments memorializes the founder of feminism, employing films, site-specific performance, gallery installations, book publishing, and social media. As Mary Wollstonecraft was the first woman travel writer, Fragments and Monuments have produced this art book, which is exactly the same size and has the same cover as the original version of A Vindication of the Rights of Women that can be found in Hackney Archive. And this book, with our Wollstonecraft live experience described in it, is set against A Vindication of the Rights of Women on the same shelf. To build a bridge between our trans-historical neighbour, Mary Wollstonecraft, and our 20th to 21st century life and the 18th century. So this is the Mary Wollstonecraft room, and I just think it's great to have different kinds of memorials to Wollstonecraft, and this is one of them, and Jenny Littlewood's bust is another, and the Stewie screen print that we used for the campaign, Mary on the Green, was sold in batches to raise money for the campaign. And actually that was the first street art that went into the government art collection. So, the campaign for Mary on the Green took 10 to 12 years, and on November the 10th last year in 2020, we were pleased to unveil a sculpture for Mary Wollstonecraft by contemporary artist Maggie Hambling. Now, it had taken us 10 years, and in the last few years we did a lot of community outreach, and we outreached to the members of Newington Green Action Group and also members of the local community. And then we had an expert judging panel who judged that Maggie Hambling should be commissioned to make her sculpture for Mary Wollstonecraft. And the location, Alex Allardyce, the writer of The Village That Changed the World, wrote the brief, and we gave the artist 3 locations. But this one was chosen, and one of the reasons for that is so that the Unitarian Meeting House can be in photographs of this memorial to Mary Wollstonecraft. Now, it's a silver lost wax process, and it was made in a foundry in Putney, and she was erected here, and we had professional photographs taken by a fabulous photographer and there's a press release, and all that happened over that Monday night. On Tuesday morning, we woke up to a Twitter storm, and the memorial by Hambling, who's a very controversial artist, had taken off, and there was a lot of people who were absolutely for this memorial to Wollstonecraft. Some people were confused as to whether it was a sculpture of Mary Wollstonecraft. Of course it's not. And the press and television really enjoyed cutting the female form and enlarging it, so that when you come here, and many of you will have been here to see it, you see something that's a completely different scale and quality. And the quality of this memorial represents the plane trees, which are these London plane trees that you see here. And the artist has used that as a starting point for her memorial, which sits in this space, embraced by London plane trees with an organic base, showing women growing one on top of each other, lifting each other up on the shoulders of past generations of women. So it's a celebratory memorial to women and their achievements going forward, and also a comment by Hambling about the obstacles still left for women to achieve. So I was really pleased to be a founder member of that campaign, and also being here on the Green. If you look online, you can find our app, which is the Wollstonecraft Walks app, and one of the things that we've got is a soundscape by Alistair Gavin, which is absolutely beautiful, using fragments of Wollstonecraft's writing, plus specially composed script. And it goes really well if you listen to it as you walk around the sculpture, as you walk around the Green. And there's a whole app there which starts at the Working Men's Club just here, the social club, and takes you round the Green and talks about the history of Newington Green and the history of Mary Wollstonecraft. And what we did on that app is we've compiled a series of readings by actors. We had 5 actors, brilliant actors in different locations, reading writing by Wollstonecraft, but also by contemporary writers, Maya Angelou, Michelle Obama, Virginia Woolf, and these are writers whose artwork is in the footsteps of Wollstonecraft and inspired by Wollstonecraft. And we finished at the Lady Mildmay with a wonderful celebration with Don One, who celebrated with a tea and birthday cake for Mary Wollstonecraft, whose birthday it was. So I recommend that you download that app. You can either do it at home, or you can come onto the Green itself and learn even more about Wollstonecraft. And if you look at the menu, you'll see there's an archive there of the work that Fragments Monuments Performance and Film Company has done to celebrate Wollstonecraft's legacy.